I'm going to say a little bit about maybe some challenges to the CSR world, to business, about how to really make the most of what's happening around the world. Perhaps first of all, if I can get this to work, I'll just give you 1 minute on where I'm coming from. So I run an organization called NESTA, which is the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts. What that actually means is that we do a lot of work in investment as an investor in early stage technology companies, usually from a purely commercial point of view, but also increasingly running impact investment funds, funding innovations in finance like accelerators, etc. We also do a lot of work on policy and research, mainly on innovation in the economy and new metrics, and our statistical tools for investment in innovation are now being taken up quite widely across Europe and the world. And we run programs. This week we launched with NASA, Europe's first Centre for Challenge Prizes. So we're issuing financial challenges, the first ones on carbon measurement and bicycling. And another one might be of interest to you is we run a £10 million Innovations in Giving Fund, which funds innovations in the giving of money and time and sharing of time, but also sharing of resources, collaborative consumption platforms. And you might be interested by some of the fascinating things which we've backed, many of them with a significant corporate involvement. And finally, we work on innovation skills, mainly in the US rather than Europe, but trying to systematize with corporates and NGOs and governments. How do you actually get the sort of processes Sue was talked about much more systematic, much more effective? In a way, what I really want to talk about is a very simple problem as I see it, which is that right across the world, and in a way it's the most striking feature of our modern economy, we have very dynamic development of technology and science, everything from iPhones to drones, the result of 100 years of massive investment by both governments and business in technology. And by comparison, our social wealth, like our ecological wealth, is in many ways stagnant. And we have these problems of climate change, aging, poverty, drugs, in many ways getting worse. And we would argue that's partly because we haven't done anything like the same investment, systematic attention to innovation in solving those problems. We also, I think, especially in Europe, have really dramatic productivity challenges even before the current crisis. This is data on health, the largest sector in every economy now. In the US, Congress forecasts health will be 50% of the economy by 2080. And the statisticians amongst you will know that this says the more you spend on health, the more people die. And the US is up here, so it's even worse if you include the US. And this one shows that the more you increase spending on health, the worse you do in keeping people alive. Now, these are symptoms of dramatically failing systems, dramatically failing industries in need of heavy innovation and very different models. That was, I think, the insight behind this very interesting report 2 years ago when Barroso set up a business panel on future innovation policy, entirely made up of large corporates. And they, I think to their own surprise, concluded the real priority for Europe wasn't just more investment in nanotechnology, high-performance computing, etc., but also shifting that whole R&D machine towards social challenges, social innovation, new kinds of venture funds. 2 years on, there has been significant progress in different parts of the Commission trying to act on this, certainly DG Research and Enterprise and so on. And Europe, I think, is beginning to engage with this much bigger world of social innovation, which covers everything from things like community wind farms or microcredit to zero carbon housing and so on. A very complex, very messy, very lively field. Many of us have been trying to make sense of this, and Stefan mentioned the Open Book of Social Innovation. There are many other reports that have been coming out in the last 5 years. mainly very practical, trying to make sense of what is being done in India or Brazil or Poland to innovate more effectively, and how can we avoid the risk of endlessly reinventing the wheel and improve the quality of how we do innovation in these fields. We have now across the world, and none of these existed 5 years ago, social innovation parks in Spain, Singapore and elsewhere, camps, many governments with social innovation funds. A few weeks ago in Brussels, there was an event on social innovation incubators. They thought there were 30, 60 turned up, I think. The White House has an office of social innovation. We have social entrepreneurs in residence, etc. The CSR world, though, if I'm honest, hasn't been that involved in most of these so far. We also have in Europe, SIX, the Social Innovation Exchange, which runs Social Innovation Europe, trying to provide a platform for sharing of good practices, new ideas, and all of you should be part of this, and CSR Europe should be part of this. It's a phenomenally dynamic field is being revealed by Social Innovation Europe, and it's also making recommendations to the Commission on new tools for finance, new tools for measurement of impact, and in particular, new tools for scaling up the great ideas maybe you find in Slovakia or Estonia or Portugal, and how can we take these really to a European scale. I think alongside this, there's a story which I'm still unclear about of CSR mutating perhaps into CSI, corporate social innovation. Some very prominent examples like Vodafone and M-Pesa in East Africa, a great deal happening around energy and sustainability, as we've heard. These examples in Europe like Grameen and Danone, Grameen and BASF, of attempting to integrate NGO civil society innovation capacity with big corporate innovation capacity. The scale, though, is still very small. And many of these, if we're honest, are pretty marginal to the core business of product and service design. The other thing which is happening, very interestingly, is a transformation of finance. And I think the UK actually is perhaps leading the world in this, although we don't know where it will go, in creating new financing sources. So a few weeks ago, Big Society Capital was launched, a new bank with £600 million. I'm on the board of it. It got its money from unclaimed bank accounts, and it's solely there to invest in social enterprises, social ventures, etc. And we have these new finance devices, social impact bonds, which have now been taken up in the US and Australia, trying to create a new way of financializing, capitalizing social impact on things like reoffending, school improvement, etc. I still feel very dissatisfied, if I'm honest, with all of this, because many of these things still feel a little bit marginal compared to the bigger issues, the bigger challenges, again, which Sue mentioned, how we really transform systems of food or mobility or energy or care. And that's what I want to sort of end up by talking about. In January, President Barroso hosted an event just down the road on social innovation with Social Innovation Europe and chose this as the example to focus people's minds on. Not an NGO, not a CSR project, but Hirico from Bilbao, a foldable, rentable electric car. Now, what's interesting about this is not just that it's a fascinating technology, very, very creative, but for it to work, you have to almost redesign everything else in your city. The physical planning, the structures of payment, behavior, and so on. So it's a project which has to be thought of as a social innovation as well as a technological innovation. A very different example, which I've been involved in the UK, is schools. Trying to design new kinds of schools which really bored teenagers will fight to get into, not to get out of. I mean, over the last 5 years, we've been working with teenagers, teachers, and businesses, and came up with the idea, what we call a studio school, which is, in some ways, quite a simple model, smallish schools, but critically, 80% of the curriculum is done through real-life practical projects, not sitting in classroom being taught by a teacher, with personal coaches for every pupil, and the very close involvement of small and big business in setting challenges and projects which children work on. And we tested it, trialed it, got dramatic improvements in exam results, which got the government strongly behind it, and a lot of big corporates. And there are now about a dozen open, 12 opening this autumn, and 80 in the pipeline. Now, it's a kind of social innovation which can only work with the complete involvement of business. It's very radical, quite high risk, but is actually working, which is what matters. So my question to you really is, where could we go next in really mobilizing corporate problem-solving abilities on some of these big issues? It's very striking in the field of aging that Europe has put huge sums of money into technologies, around assistive technologies, etc., most of which haven't worked at all, because they've been thought of as technological problems, not as social behavioral ones. Huge amounts of money have gone into carbon reduction, subsidies for retrofitting and so on, but nearly always they've treated it as a technical problem, not a social one, and most have failed dramatically, again, compared to the amount of money going in. So we need ways of tapping the brain power in your companies, and I don't think that's yet really happening seriously. We need new ways of combining social creativity with corporate capacity. One thing we're working on is trying to work with big corporates on creating accelerators which finance startups linked to the corporate goals of perhaps an IBM or a Unilever, whoever it may be. I think there's quite an important idea there which could really deliver business results as well as social results. And of course, in all of this, we're keen to focus on measurement, a huge amount of work underway on both sides of the Atlantic on measurement of social as well as financial impact. I guess the big issue for me is how we really get to systemic change. Sue was talking about one planet living. In some respects, we have over 20 years seen quite a dramatic shift from, waste being entirely landfill to much more recycling, much more reduction, as well as much more EFW and so on. These are systemic changes. And whenever you see a systemic change, it's the interaction of technologies, change market structures, regulations, and critically, behavior change, social change. What interests me is where are there the equivalents which we as Europe have to really get our heads around. And to me, the one which stands out is aging. Where right across the board we have systems around aging, whether it's employment or pensions or care, which are dramatically out of sync with the realities of our current population and the realities of what people say they want, which is often to work, to be useful longer, to be cared for, to die at home. All of these things are blocked by our institutions and systems. And one of the things we're working on is how do you get systemic change around aging, which has to involve all of these different things. We're financing a lot of innovations in this space. We know that in countries like Germany, as much as 40% of consumer spending will be coming from over 60s very shortly. We know the pressures on public spending, but we need business engaged as a serious problem solver, systems design changer, not just through small, well-intentioned, but not very high impact projects. So, in conclusion, I think this was quite a breakthrough 2 years ago when essentially big business in Europe said to the Commission, we need a very different model of innovation to that which was perhaps the key one in the 80s and 90s, which was solely about technology, driving up R&D, tech transfer, etc. Those all remain important, but they've got to be joined by a very different approach to innovation in how we organize society. Innovation in, as Sue said, in lifestyles as much as in stuff. But this is only just beginning. And I still don't quite see it permeating business discourse across Europe, is not yet fully integrated into CSR programs, and it's only beginning to be integrated into the ways governments think about things. And if we are going to get Europe to thrive in the next 10 or 20 years to deal with a huge scale of crisis we face, we really need all of you guys to help make it a success. Thank you.